All right, here's how we concluded the first part of Chapter 8, Key Issue 4, Political Geography. Again, make sure you understand all these questions before moving on. We will continue with looking at borders and how boundaries can cause problems and they have distinct geographical features, which is our content objective for Key Issue 4. Looking at the Kurdish population, what kind of boundaries do we see here in Kurdistan? Well, this is a nation because it is a group that is an homogeneous population with similar ethnic, cultural factors, and those factors can include religion and language. So it is a nation. However, it is not a state, so it does not have sovereignty. So the border that we see here is none of the borders that we've talked about. It does not have a physical border, it does not have a cultural, geometric border, or it does not have an antecedent border, or a subsequent border, a consequent border, or a relic border. However, as mentioned earlier, there was a guarantee of the Kurdish people after World War I for their own statehood. However, Turkey didn't grant it. But this is a nation without a state, so no borders. All right, continuing to American Indian reservations. As we saw with Canada, the Native Americans were granted a created state or province called the Navatnu, and that was guaranteed by the Canadian government to have more sovereignty for the indigenous people of Canada. However, in the United States, it's a little bit different because these borders are seen as sovereign borders on Indian reservations, Native American reservations. So we see Native American reservations have borders, however, they do not have sovereignty. And so again, to have a border, you need sovereignty. So they do not have a recognized border, unlike that of Navatnu, which is the province created for indigenous Native Americans in Canada. All right, continue on. Size. Remember, size doesn't matter in terms of a state. We have Russia is the largest country that occupies 11% of all land. It has the most abundance of natural resources. Just because a state's large doesn't mean it has abundance of resources either. When we look at small microstates, small microstates are very small in size, with the smallest state being, as we learned, with the Vatican City, or as some contested with Monaco. Size does not always guarantee resources as well. When we look at the shapes, they control various they control links to the boundaries with other states. They can definitely affect communication. They can also affect conflict, or they can act as a centripetal or centrifugal force when we talk about shapes of countries. When we talk about the value of a centripetal force, it can encourage social unity with strong internal communication, but it also can be a centrifugal force because with the shape of a country, its potential for conflict with neighbors, administration can be difficult to the exterior portions of certain shapes, and then it also can have people that exacerbate conflict with other regions within that country. So it can, again, shape can act as a centrifugal force to nationalism or a centripetal force to nationalism. Looking at compact states are most found in sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa, the compact states of Burundi, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. These compact states tend to have a strong centripetal force of efficient communication. They usually have good communication because the node is in the central portion of that state. So the functional region provides very minimal distance decay to the exterior portions of the boundary. So in other words, it's the center of command is equidistant from all sides of the shape. And it can be somewhat efficient at defending its borders. However, just like any other state, it can experience civil wars and ethnic rivalries within an ethnic state, as we see with looking at Rwanda, between the ethnic tension between the Tutsis and the Hutus. Elongated states is another shape. Elongated states, elongated states have a long and narrow shape. Examples in sub-Saharan Africa would be like Gambia, and I'll show you other examples in the next slides. Gambia, when we look at Gambia, elongated state was created by the British. They controlled the mouth of the river, and the French mostly controlled Gambia, the territory around that river. And then Malawi was also an elongated state, and Malawi was a state that was British declared the territory as a protectorate in order to deter Portuguese on the west side of Lake Malawi. So that's what shaped it as an elongated state. Elongated states can have centrifugal forces, meaning that they have poor communication to the external ends. It can cause irredentism. Remember, irredentism is when you have different minority ethnicities or different cultures, dominant cultures, that want to break off from the state, the current state, and annex, and then they can form their own statehood. Or they could form, also we see with shatter belts too. We could see with the, well, not as much with the elongated states, but more irredentism, where you have minority culture or minority ethnic group that wants to separate from the current state. And then also you see with that separatist movements with a lack of communication. When we talk about elongated states, their capital is usually placed at the center, so that really is what exacerbates this poor communication towards the ends. Here's some examples of elongated states. As I mentioned, Gambia. This was created by the British. Along the Gambia River, and the main reason is to control the mouth of the river and the flow of the river from French that controls Gambia and the surrounding areas of the river. As I mentioned, here's some compact states in sub-Saharan Africa. Prorupted states. They are compact states with a large projecting extension. Proruptions are created for two principal reasons. One is to provide a state with access to resources, and two is to separate two states that otherwise would share a boundary. When we look at prorupted states, a lot of them are created through colonization, common of colonizing countries. They would separate two states that other would share a boundary. A couple examples that we have that in your textbook is the Caprivi Strip. That was created when Namibia was a colony of Germany. That proruption disrupted communication among the British colonies of southern Africa. It also provided the Germans access to Zambezi, one of the wealthiest resources of rivers in sub-Saharan Africa. And again, it provided them ports from the central part of Africa to the Atlantic Ocean. When we look at, there's also proruptions in Thailand. The proruption was created for trade through the Malacca Strait. And then we have perforated states. Perforated states is a compact state with a huge projecting, compact states are the perforated. Let me start again. Perforated states, a state that completely surrounds another state, and usually it surrounds what is known as a landlocked state or a compact state. But compact and landlocked are not the same thing. Landlocked is surrounded entirely by another state. There's really two perforated states in the world: South Africa, with the landlocked states Lesotho. Then you have also Swaziland. Then you also have Italy with perforated the Vatican City, and also in the north San Marino. In these enclave or compact states, they're usually, a couple of things about states that are landlocked. One is they don't have access to ports, so oftentimes they have to have good relations with their neighbor to access ports for trade and movement of material goods. And like in the case of South Africa, where we look at Lesotho, Lesotho is mostly comprised of black South Africans, whereas surrounding South Africa, the government's controlled by whites. who can discriminate against black majority populations like found in Lesotho. All right, there shows you the Caprivi strips through Namibia that was designed by the Germans, again accessing the Zambezi, cutting off the communication of the British and giving them accessible ports to move mass shipments of goods, resources from the Zambezi River. All right, and here we have the two landlocked countries. Again, it shows the importance of these countries relying on the South African government to access key ports for world trade. Fragmented states have centripetal and centrifugal forces. Fragmented states are several discontinuous pieces of a territory, so they're non-contiguous areas of land. Fragmentation is particularly significant for some states that face problems and costs associated with communication and maintaining national unity. When we look at some fragmented states, we can see Angola is a fragmented state in sub-Saharan Africa. It's divided into two fragments by the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's a detached Cabinda. Cabinda is a small territory that's detached from Angola to the north. The population belongs to the distinct ethnic groups of the Cabinda. And another fragmented state would be in South Africa would be Tanzania. And Tanzania has the island of Zanzibar, which is the mainland of Tanganyika, and then they have the island of Zanzibar. All right, it can create irredentism, as we see with Angola, with the Cabinda, a different ethnic group that's separate from the Angolan ethnic group. It can hinder communication, which again creates irredentism, the breaking off from a cultural or language or cultural breakoff from another state. Then it also has fragments, states separated by water and states separated by intervening states. So there's two types of fragments. Here shows the fragmented state of Gambia. Here shows this landlocked states of Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Botswana. Remember, landlocked states lack a direct outlet to the sea. So moving bulky goods like petroleum, grain, ore, or vehicles long distances by ships, they must have a good relationship with the countries that have sea ports. Africa has the most landlocked states, 15 in all, of the total of 55 states in the continent of Africa. And a lot of these are a result to British colonization and dividing up the land without regards to land clans and ethnic groups of sub-Saharan Africa. And then they also divided independent states without regard to whether they were landlocked, because they had already built railroads in the colonial empire to connect interior Africa to the sea. So again, these were easy boundaries for Europeans to use after the Berlin Act of 1885. Okay. Continuing on with key issue 4, explain why defining political democratic boundaries creates political or potential conflict. ICANN statement 1, define census, redistricting, congressional districts, and gerrymandering. 2, explain why gerrymandering affects the national level of democratic governments, specifically the United States. 3, apply your understanding of wasted, stacked, and excess forms of gerrymandering. Gerrymandering, it is defined as the process of redrawing legislative boundaries. They do it through the redistricting process. The redistricting process is when you have a census that's done every 10 years. And the redistricting is done by, in most cases, the major political parties in the state legislature. But in some cases, redrawing is done by third-party institutions. Most states, however, when redrawing the boundaries or redistricting, the state legislator will do most of it. And they also use GIS, which is a very helpful tool for creating gerrymandered districts. Redistricting happens every 10 years. That's done through the census, and the census collects demographic data from inhabitants of a country, and they'll use that demographic data to gerrymander districts. Gerrymandering is done by both political parties. They bent the rules to fit their dominant political party. It is still a problem today. We see problems where we have net in and net out migration. So net out migration in the Northeast and the Midwest. So there's redrawing of boundaries every 10 years because of you have net in, net out. You have immigrants and emigrants that change population demographics. But it is definitely a problem today. And when we look at Minnesota, we have 8 congressional districts. So with the 2020 census, it will help determine how many congressional districts Minnesota has. And remember, in our state legislature, the House of Congress has 435 districts. So there is 435 representatives in the U.S. House of Representatives in our bicameral legislative system. So it's important for congressional seats in the legislative branch, specifically the House of Congress, or the House of Representatives in Congress. Here we can take a look at Texas with the highest net in. So Texas is a state that has a large number of congressional seats. And with those congressional seats, there's a changing ethnic and cultural makeup of Texans, which has been traditionally Republican. Hihowever, with a large influx of immigrants that tend to side with the Democratic Party, those that are traditionally African American and Hispanics and Cubans, they have a tendency to vote Democratic. So again, this would be a prime example of where maybe gerrymandering might take place, because people of color in the liberal city of Houston, again, they can create gerrymandering in many ways, which we'll talk about in a second. Here's a look at the geographical shift that's in congressional apportionment between 1930 and 2010. So we can see the loss of congressional seats and the gain of congressional seats. And by and large, we see a lot of congressional seats and where we see a large influx of immigrants or net in population. All right, so to repeat what I just said, U.S. House of Representatives draw congressional districts every 10 years through the census. Redrawing legislative boundaries for the benefit of a party is called gerrymandering. Gerrymandering states, they're in your textbook too. Here's a difference in Republicans and Democrats with basic questions that were polled in an NPR in 2019. So you can look at the ideological difference between Democrats and Republicans and reasons why gerrymandering is important for those political parties. There are 3 ways to gerrymander. One is wasted vote, another is excess vote, another is stacked vote. When we look at stacking the vote, it's also referred to as packing. What they'll do is they'll put like-minded voters in oddly shaped congressional districts, much like we saw with Republicans packing Democrat districts in Pennsylvania, which was a state that actually went to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and it was challenged in the state Supreme Court that they said they must change the map because they drew a map of what is described as Donald Duck kicking a football. Other ways to gerrymandered are wasted. Wasted, again, is when you spread out your opposition over a wide area across many congressional districts. And then excess is when you have you concentrate supporters in a few districts, so minimizing the power of congressional districts in states. All right. states that, let's see, I think I have it on the next slide. All right, this shows you wasted. This shows you excess. This shows you stacked or packed gerrymandering. Again, odd shapes. That's where you get that odd shape of a salamander or odd shape of Donald Duck kicking a football, like in Pennsylvania. Here we're looking at congressional seats in Ohio, and it's a swing state in many cases because you have almost a split between Democrats and Republicans. However, we see some areas that are potential for what would be packed or stacking districts, such as in District 8. We can see that there could be stacking in, or packing of Republicans. Or if we look at Congressional District 11, where we see African Americans are packed in districts combining parts of Cleveland and Akron together. So again, we can see two possibilities of Ohio in the congressional districts leading up to 2020 that could have gerrymandering for both the Democratic Party advantage and the Republican Party advantage. All right, there's a diagram of the states in the forms of gerrymandering that exist today. All right, that'll take us to the end of notes. And then in summary.